Hey, can I have everybody's attention, please? We'll get the meeting started. If you haven't had a chance to buy any tickets, we'll go ahead and do that now. I'm DJ Smith. I'm the vice president for the club. I'm going to be handling the announcements and run some of the board meetings and build transitions out of being president.
Yeah.
Tonight's announcements, Title I on with Casting Carolinas is April 26th through the 27th. We always sponsor this event every year. Again, we need volunteers to help on land and to help recipients. I'll do the point of contact for that. If anybody has any questions, there's a flyer on the back table with a QR code. Night of fly tying, open tying is Tuesday, April the 22nd, right here at Bass Grove at 6 p.m. We have another tying charity event coming up, the Southern Fly Tyers Guilds. The club is supporting them. That'll be the Mayfly Project at the Patterson Camp Weisner Learning Center in Lenore. The patterns that they're going to be tying on April the 19th is the Waltz Worm, the Squirmy Wormy, and the Y2K. Lunch is provided. I went the last time they had it. I thought it was a good time. All the supplies will be provided. Just bring your own bison. And that's from 9 to 3 p.m. It's time for the Maggie Valley Fly Fishing Festival again. I talked to Bill before the meeting. It seems like that thing gets bigger and bigger each year. There's going to be an additional 100 plus.
Like 189 new vendors.
Well over 100 new vendors. That's May the 23rd through the 24th. We had the Whistle Stop Lodge, our spring trip. We do it twice a year, the spring and the fall. That occurred the 3rd through the 6th of this month. We had 11 people sign up and go and attended it. It was a great trip. Everybody caught fish. We fished the trophy waters of Cherokee. Up and down the hill was really hot. We took a CG, big snowbird, and I think somebody even fished Deep Creek. But the most successful stream was probably up and down the hill. I'll be posting something on the website tonight. The picnic is coming up May 31st from 9 to 4. That's a Saturday. Right now we only have 2 people signed up, so please, if you're going to attend, try to sign up so we can get a head count. The cost will be $15. It's going to be burgers, hot dogs, drinks. We're asking all the attendees to bring a side dish and dessert. There's also a flyer for that on the back table with a QR code, or you can sign up on the website. That brings us to our speaker tonight. The club is going to have Richard Griggs Sr., the owner of Carolina Mountain Sports. Richard's been a long-time club member and a big supporter of the club, and he's going to be talking about kayak fishing for smallmouth bass.
Oh, is that the topic tonight?
Yeah. You can just
Oh, jeez. Thank you.
TV's back on for you.
So we're going to talk about fishing for smallmouth bass, both wading and kayaking. And certainly if anybody's got any questions, feel free. As many of you know, the store I run in Statesville is pretty much a one-man operation. So before you make a special trip to run up there and spend a lot of money, you need to call first and make sure I'm going to be there. And on that note, I don't plan to be there for the next week or so. So if you don't get there this week, you're probably out of luck next week. But again, call and check the answer machine just in case. We're going to talk about smallmouth fishing tonight. Now, Bob Martin put me on the spot a week or so ago when he posted something on Facebook about tonight's program, and he said I was going to reveal the top 5 places to catch smallmouth bass. If that wasn't bad enough, then he said I was going to reveal the secret flies to catch large smallmouth bass. And then he said I was going to reveal special kayak techniques that result in superb success for fishing for smallmouth. Yeah. So I've had to change the program and make up some stuff to include some of that information. But just a quick survey. How many people here have been fishing for smallmouth bass once or more? Everybody, sweet. And how many people do it out of a canoe or a kayak or a pontoon boat? Okay, not as many hands, but a few. So we're going to touch on several of those topics. We're going to talk about the best time to hit the rivers to fish for smallmouth, places to go. These are secret spots. Bob, I'm sorry, I already said good things about you. I'm sorry you missed it. Yeah. We're going to talk about tackle to use for fishing and some tactics and techniques that have worked for me, and maybe some other stuff that people might not think to tell you about when you're fishing for smallmouth bass. Now, I know several of you we've fished together, and I'm gonna make you raise your hand. Sarah, raise your hand for the higher so everybody can see that. Sarah Freeman, Nick Freeman, Marty Moose. We've hung out on the river a few times, and you'll see some evidence of that in tonight's show. But this is a pretty typical smallmouth bass. This is on the main stem of the New River in Ashe County. Most of these bass are probably running 10, 12, 14 inches long, but some run a good bit bigger than that. This one decided he wanted to jump on a modified stealth bomber, which is a pretty effective topwater fly for smallies. I like to fish for smallmouth probably for the same reason that a lot of you do. They fight really hard. Invariably, somebody for their first time fishing, they'll hook a smallmouth, they'll get it in, they'll land it, and they'll say, I thought it was bigger than this, which is a good example of how aggressive they are. But I enjoy it because I get to float the river. I see scenery that most people don't get to see. I enjoy casting, sort of like archery. You're trying to hit that bullseye. Sometimes you're trying to get that fly into a very narrow spot on the river or a spot where you think there's going to be a nice bass lurking. So those are some of the aspects that I really enjoy about fly fishing for smallmouth bass. And other people enjoy it as well and do pretty good at it. So here's one of our club members. We were floating the main stem of the New. I was about 75 yards away. I happened to glance over where Sarah's boat was, and her rod was bent over, and it looked to me like the fish was towing her in the boat downstream. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good fish, so I need to paddle over there and get a picture when she gets the fish landed. And just as I arrived, she got the anchor on the boat down, got the paddle stowed, and netted the fish, and it was a really nice smallmouth. Looked to me like it had been starting to feed for the winter there. Where do you go for smallmouth? And the simple answer is most of the streams and rivers in western North Carolina, west of here with a couple of exceptions. I fish the South Fork of the New a lot, the main stem of the New River in Ashe and Allegheny County, and sometimes up in Virginia. But all the big rivers that you hear about, the French Broad, the Rocky Broad River, Tuckasegee River, Tow, and a bunch of others, all have smallmouth bass. A few years ago, a couple of the biologists from the state decided they needed to do a survey. And they realized that the only way to really do the survey was to put their waders on, grab their rods, and go wading and try and figure out which streams had a population of smallies and which didn't. And they produced this map. They produced a brochure on smallmouth fishing, which I haven't seen in a while. But this is a map of the streams that they actually got surveyed. And I feel bad for them because they spent a lot of time wading and fishing, so I know that was a tough job. But interestingly enough, over here is one of the easternmost areas where you'll find smallmouth bass. The Uwharrie River and the Little River, which are a little bit southeast of here, not very far away at all. and apparently they've got a pretty good population of smallies.
They attached to the Petey River. They just didn't survey it.
Well, people have known about the smallmouth in the Uwharrie for quite a while. And that's one of those areas where you can wade it and float it, and it's pretty accessible. If you go a little bit north of there, you've got the Dan River. And then take a look at this. These sound familiar to the trout fishermen. The Ararat River, the Fishel River, the Mitchell River. How many people have been on the Mitchell River in the last couple of weeks? Yeah, few. Yeah, join the crowd. And when you go on over, Reddy's, Elk Creek, another popular DH stream, these are probably lower sections than the delayed harvest trout waters, where they dump into the Yadkin. Interestingly enough, the Yadkin has had a good population of smallmouth, and it used to be written up in a few magazine articles. I haven't seen an article on that in quite a while. But you can Google information on that. An interesting thing, I happened to Google just to see what was out there on smallmouth fishing, and here's an article that pops up from April of 2025. And I started reading the article. It was in Carolina Sportsman, and I thought, this is an old article from several years ago, but it had a current date on it. And then I checked another article, same thing. So I don't know what that's about, but not all the articles out there are current, but they may still be good, worthwhile information. But you go on west, Tuckasegee out there, French Broad River, all these, and probably a bunch of others have a good population of smallmouth bass. But here's where I lurk most of the time, up on the South Fork of the New, and the South Fork and the North Fork in Ashe County come together in the community of Crumpler, at an area that we all call the confluence. And there's where the New River proper starts, and it flows through a little bit of Ashe and Allegheny County, then up into Virginia, then it comes back down into North Carolina, then it goes on up into Virginia, way on up through Virginia. This is one of those spots where, whether you're in North Carolina or Virginia, you still just need the North Carolina license, because there's a reciprocal agreement between the two states. So don't worry if you happen to get into Virginia. Now, that reciprocal license ends somewhere here around Sparta, where the Little River dumps in. If you happen to float past the Little River, you better have a Virginia license. And I do fairly frequently see wardens up on this stretch of the river checking at the takeouts and stuff. Bill and I talked a little bit about this earlier. You have the choice of either wading for smallmouth bass or floating in some sort of watercraft. And the first couple of years that I got into this, seriously, I opened a store in '98, and I decided I need to really start doing a lot of smallmouth fishing. I spent a lot of time driving gravel roads in Ashe County, trying to find places to get in the stream. Had my DeLorme Atlas with me so I could make sure I didn't get too lost. And I found some good places to wade, and I found some places that were a waste of time. So you can certainly cover the water very thoroughly if you're wading. You can hit all the spots. You just can't cover nearly as much water. And one of the things that I found out is that some of the best areas to fish are extremely rocky. They have ledges with deep holes between them. It's really difficult to wade those areas. So you have to do a little research if you're going to do wading. You have to do a little research to find out where you can park your car, what the river's going to be like in that area, and then you have to watch out that you don't find yourself in a dead zone that's devoid of any sort of cover. It's shallow, it's gravelly, it's sandy. It's just not worth fishing, but you've got to work your way on through that. Fortunately, if you're a wade fisherman, the South Fork of the New River, as it flows through Ashe County, has been designated as the New River State Park. And there's probably at least 4 or 5 state park access areas on about 25, 30 miles of river that flow through Ashe County. Now, some of those are pretty good fishing and some aren't so good. And the county has actually established some new sections where you can access, launch boats, or get in and wade on the South Fork of the New. But, again, a little more research. There's one spot, the 221 access area for New River State Park. And somebody asked me if that was a good spot to go, and I said, well, it is if you step in at the canoe launch area and you go left. Oh, okay. So they came back a few days later. I said, how was the fishing? And they said, it was lousy. It's an awful stretch of river. I said, did you go left or right? Well, we went right. I said, well, I told you to go left. If they went right, they got into one of these dead zones. If they went left, they would have found a lot of good areas where smallmouth like to hang out.
Dead zones, they often have like shrubs and grasses that overhang. If you cast into that, is that an exception to that dead zone, or they don't want to be there no matter what you got?
I would say that's probably an exception, but I usually don't waste a lot of time there because it's just like, we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But so at some point I became a big fan of floating the river. You can cover a lot of water. The typical float on the New that we've done several times is about 7 miles long. There's no way that you'd think about trying to wade that much water. You get to focus on the best spots, scoot through the dead zone. If you're going to float the river, obviously you have to have some sort of watercraft, whether it's a canoe, a kayak, pontoon boat, or an inner tube. And then it's important to learn some of the basics of boat handling just so you don't get into trouble. Now, most of the river is pretty tame. Anything you want to share with us over there? No, okay. Most of the river is pretty tame, but there are some spots where you can have problems, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the main thing is learn some basics of boat handling, whether you go rent a boat from Zulu's Canoes or New River Outfitters or Riverside Canoe and Tube. If you do a little research about how to handle a boat, you'll be a lot better off. One of the things that I think is worth doing if you're going to tackle smallmouth fishing is do a little research on the river level. And fortunately, several of the rivers have gauges on them that the Geological Survey puts out there, and you can go online and check the river level. So on the South Fork of the New, near Jefferson, right below Zulu's Canoes, there's a river gauge there, or at least it used to be there. I haven't checked it since Helene went through the area. And you can pull up that gauge and you can see whether it says 2.7 feet or 1.5 feet or 3.7 feet. If you look at it over a period of time, or you can scroll back and look at the historical data, you can see that gauge, a normal river level is about 2 feet, maybe 2.1, 2.2. And that's a good level for fishing, floating, and wading. If you look at the gauge and it says 3.7, okay, that's a little bit different. Might even just say 2.9, 2.10. That's a pretty good indication that there's been a storm up there. The rivers may be muddy if it's not too high and fast to fish and float. It may be muddy. So that's something to think about before you drive an hour and a half or 2 hours. Also check the local weather conditions to see what the wind forecast is. Because there's nothing worse than being out on the river, 7-mile float, you've got 15 to 25 mile per hour gust of wind, and you're trying to control that boat and fish at the same time. So some days it's just not worth it. Here's a shot of Nick. Caught a smallmouth jumping. I wasn't on this trip, I don't think. It was pouring down rain. You can't really appreciate it in this picture. Pouring down rain. Fortunately, Nick had his publicity manager videoing. And we took a frame out of that and caught that smallmouth just as it was leaping out of the water. Here's a pretty typical spot. I like to show this because it's one of the more scenic spots on the river. big, high, rocky bluff. Every now and then you'll see an eagle in the area. But you can't get to this section of the river by car, and the closest public road is probably 1.5 miles in either direction from this spot. There is over on the left bank a campground, but it's a paddle-in campground only, canoe, kayak, and that's the only way you can get to that campground. And even if you could get in there because the rangers happened to leave the gate open way up on the ridge at the road, you couldn't wade this area because it's too deep. A lot of this area is 8, 10, 12 feet deep. You get over in here, you've got some very shallow ledges, but it's very steep in between the ledges. So it'd be very difficult to fish this area trying to wade, but it's real easy in some sort of boat or watercraft. We don't need to talk about the secret spots here. Here's another spot. This looks like, oh, this is easy. There's a guy standing out there on the rocks. And Highway 58 is right over here in the mouth of Wilson, Virginia. Unfortunately, to get down here, there's only one spot where you can pull off on the paved road onto a little gravel pullout. And then you've got to slide down 25 or 35 feet through poison ivy to get down to the riverbank here. So I recommend that you get into the river immediately and wash off. But Kenny's out here on the rocks fishing, but that's about the only place he can fish because, again, everything is too steep to wade between these rocks. So he's pretty well locked into fishing that one spot. Otherwise, it'd be a good stretch of river. One of the typical questions that I get in the store is, well, how do you float the river? Do you go by yourself? And I said, well, yeah, a lot of the time. And they said, well, how do you do that? You know, how do you get back to your car and that sort of thing? And that's a good question. What I started out doing a few years ago, I'd put the boat in and I'd paddle upstream against the current. And that was very easy to do, particularly if you used a double-bladed paddle. You could paddle upstream through the slow water. You'd get to some fast water, some ripples or something like that, get out of the boat and walk it through, or tie the boat to your waist and just wade on through and fish. And it's easy to tow an unloaded boat. That's no problem at all. And I did that a lot. You could go up 1 mile upriver, 2 miles upriver, fishing your way up, paddling and wading, and then work your way back down to where you left your car, and that worked fine. Obviously, it's easier, and you can cover more river if you've got 2 people or more people, multiple boats, multiple cars. You can leave one car at the takeout. You can load the boats on the other vehicle, drive upriver, launch, float downstream, then go back and pick up the vehicle that you left at the put in. You got to make sure that one of those vehicles can haul 2 or more boats if you're going to do that. And so that can be a challenge. I zeroed in on hiring a shuttle. And on the South Fork of the New and maybe some other areas, there are several places that rent canoes and kayaks, and you can hire them to shuttle you. And so sometimes I'd go to their place of business. They'd either get in my car or I'd load the boat on their trailer. We'd drive upriver and float back to where I was parked at their business. Or I'd set up a time and they'd pick me up downriver at the takeout, leave my vehicle there, and shuttle me in the boat upriver. And then I could just float back and take as much time as I wanted to. But if you've got multiple cars, if you go rent a boat, they're going to shuttle you anyway because you've rented a boat from them. So that takes care of that problem. Most of the smallies are 10, 12, 14 inches. Occasional ones 16, 18 inches. But then you'll get some that are over 5 pounds, and those are pretty special fish, and they will definitely tow the boat around. What do they eat? Well, they eat a lot of stuff, just like largemouth bass do. My experience is most of the time when I've caught a bass, it's not at all unusual for them to regurgitate a crayfish. They like crayfish, and it doesn't have to be small crayfish. They like hellgrammites. You'll see a picture of a hellgrammite in a minute. Minnows, sculpins, salamanders, snakes. We had one day on the New where the smallmouth were gorging on caddisflies that were emerging. And that was kind of an interesting day. And then they eat stuff that falls on the surface of the river, whether it's grasshoppers, crickets, beetles, cicadas, baby birds, or whatever. They eat a lot of stuff on the surface. There's a typical example. I've seen that several times where the bass hit my topwater bug, but it was already dining on a full meal of about a 3 or 4 inch crayfish. So I can't imagine that it was still hungry, but it was eager to eat anyway. That's a hellgrammite. How many people have played with hellgrammites? A couple, not as many. These get to be 3 or 4 inches long that I'm aware of. If you're going to pick them up and handle them, that's a pretty serious set of pinchers there, so people tell me. This is the larva of a Dobson fly, a big wing fly that it evolves into. Popular fish or popular bait for smallies and trout. I think this is kind of a given, but if you're going to imitate, if you've got a fly that imitates a crayfish, you want to fish it the way a crayfish behaves. And it doesn't dart around and scoot like a minnow does. It crawls on the bottom, maybe scoots quickly a time or two, drifts with the current. Same thing with hellgrammites, they roll and tumble in the current. If you're fishing sinking flies, just like when you're fishing nymphs on a trout stream, you watch for the leader or the line to do something unusual. You watch for the twitch. And I found a spot on the South Fork of the New when I was doing a lot of wade fishing. I had to park on the gravel road, walk 75 yards through head-high brush, slide down the riverbank, got into the river. Some good-looking water, some ledges, some little pockets, some overhanging willow trees and stuff. I had tied a fly the night before that I thought looked pretty good. Kind of a woolly booger and root beer color on steroids. And I flipped it out there and let it drift over the ledge. Nothing. And then I saw just a faint little twitch, a little jerk on my leader. I set the hook, fish on. So, landed that fish, did the same thing again, cast it up. It drifted over the ledge or rolled into this little pocket below the ledge. There was another twitch, set the hook, another fish. I did that 3 or 4 times. I'm feeling pretty good now, like, I got this stuff down pat. Not only have I found the secret spot on the river, I have developed the secret fly. So I went back that night and tied more of those root beer woolly boogers on steroids. Went back the next day, head-high brush, slid down the riverbank, waded across, let it drift across that ledge. Nothing. Did it again. Nothing. Did it again. Nothing. By now my language is becoming colorful. So it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. Top water for smallmouth. I don't think there's anything more fun than fishing topwater bugs for smallmouth bass. And one of the common things that I picked up on is when you cast a big topwater bug, popping bug, stealth bomber, sneaky Pete, whatever, you cast it out there, it's a good idea to try and cast it so that it lands with a splat on the water. It actually smacks the water. And that's like maybe like ringing a dinner bell. And it's like, oh, food fell in the water. And then just let it drift. Don't twitch it, don't wiggle it, don't pop it. Even if it's a popping bug, when I was growing up, if you had a popping bug, you were supposed to pop it. Not for smallmouth. Just let it drift, float, swing in the current. Let those rubber legs wiggle. I've had several smallmouth guides say the same thing. Now, every now and then, the smallmouth didn't read the book on that. And so a little popper or twitch helps occasionally. But most of the time, cast it out there, big wide open loop, not a pretty loop. smack it on the water, and then see if it drifts into some place where there's a fish that's hungry enough to eat it. But fight the urge to pop it. This looks to me like that same modified stealth bomber, but a fairly typical smallie. Where do they lurk? And this is sort of the question earlier. I sat through a presentation several years ago by a guy named Dave Duffy, and Dave was instrumental on folks starting this club and some of the other clubs like this. And Dave's recommendation for catching smallmouth bass was to cast your fly as close to the bank as you can. And then on the next cast it even closer. Now, as a retailer, I like that advice because people lose a lot of flies that way. But I found that to be very true, and it's surprising. Sarah's bass that you saw in the opening picture, I think, was caught very near the bank in shallow water. And there'll be some nice fish lurking in very shallow water. Obviously up under overhanging limbs or grass where it's leaning over. So yeah, if you've got a dead zone and there's some overhanging branches or whatever, or grass, it's worth focusing on those just to see what's under there. I can't hardly pass up a sycamore tree on the river without trying to cast up under the branches, even if they're only 2 or 3 feet off the water. And yes, I might lose an occasional fly, but that's still a lot of the fun to see if you can hit that target and get it up under those branches. And almost invariably, there's a fish up under there. We talked about the ledges. A lot of times when the river comes down and hits the ledge, it slows down before the water goes over, and fish will lie just upstream of that ledge looking for food coming down. Or right after it goes over the ledge and there's a depression downstream, they'll hide there. Eddies behind rocks out in the middle of an otherwise uneventful looking area. If I find a rock in midstream, you can almost bet I'm going to try and put a fly right in the middle of that eddy downstream of the rock. And oftentimes there's a fish or two in there. Here's a good example of a watercraft. This is Jim Mackey, who's a club member. Jim and I floated one day. He's got a nice canoe here, and one of the things that's really nice about it, it only weighs about 40 pounds. And that's pretty sweet when you're starting to pick it up and carry it back to your car and load it on top. He looks pretty comfortable. I think he's using a double-bladed paddle in the canoe. He's got an anchor rig here, so he can hold in position and fish spots on the river. Which sort of leads us to the discussion of which boat is the best. Canoes, kayaks, solo pontoon boats, two-man pontoon boats, inner tubes. They're all great, and they all have their disadvantages. So I'm not sure there's one perfect boat. Everybody's going to have their own preference as to what they like and what works for them. When I was selling boats, people would come in and say, oh, I want to buy a canoe or I want to buy a kayak. And the first question I would usually ask them is, how are you going to transport it? What do you mean? I said, how are you going to carry this boat to the river? Oh, well, I don't know. I said, you going to put it on top of your car? Yeah, I'm going to car top it. Which leads to the next question. Can you lift it? Can you pick it up? And I can't tell you how many people have said, I bought this boat and then I sold it because I couldn't pick it up. It was too heavy. Most good fishing kayaks that are popular probably weigh 70 to 80 pounds. I don't know about you guys, but 70 pounds is a lot heavier than it was 50 years ago. Not to mention all the junk. I decided I would fish in a kayak tournament down at the coast, down at Oak Island. And miserable weather day, but we were out there waiting on the starting gun, and some guy pulls up in his pickup, and he had a native, it was a new fishing kayak native had just come out with. And it was in the bed of his pickup truck, and we're hanging around. I said, you want me to help you unload that? And he said, man, that'd be great. He said, you want the front or the back? I said, well, it doesn't really matter. It's just a kayak, right? Well, I didn't know he had a 12-volt battery in there and all this other gear stuck in the boat. So, but even without the accessories, some people find out that it's more than they can handle. If you're going to rent, if you want to sample floating, and you're going to rent a boat, one of the things that I think is important is to provide some of your own personal gear. If you go to a canoe or kayak outfitter, you're going to get the boat, you're going to get the paddle, and you're going to get a life jacket. That's it. I think there's some other things that you want to include, like 20 feet of rope, so that if you decide to get out of the boat and fish, or you get out of the boat for some other reason, you can tie that boat to your waist, or you can tie it to a nice solid branch, or if you want to fish, the worst thing that can happen is you're out of the boat and you turn around and you see it going downstream. Don't ask me how I know that. An anchor. An anchor is pretty handy. I anchor all the time in the river. Now, that's not necessarily something you want to carry with you, but a canoe or a kayak anchor doesn't need to be very heavy. But it's very beneficial, particularly if you have a rope to tie it to. I used to take a mesh bag and put river rocks in it and use that as the anchor when I got there. And then when I'd finish fishing, I just dumped the rocks back in the river. Waterproof bags for valuables. You know, the canoe rental places aren't going to have those, but you want something that's really waterproof to protect phones, key fobs, wallets, all that sort of stuff. This is a customized watercraft hauling trailer. It's a Tractor Supply trailer, and it's been customized with the addition of 2 2x4s to go across it. And we've actually hauled 4 boats on this thing. Yeah, carefully, but we've hauled 4 boats on it. So just about any way will work. And even if the boat's heavier than you think it should be, you can there's still ways to load it by yourself, you know, whether it's on a Suburban or a Subaru. Yeah, so he said watch your mirrors. So if the boat that slides off the top of the car, side view mirrors are a prime target.
Right. I know how to replace it.
Here's a shot of a friend of mine, Kenny. He bought this 17-foot canoe because he wanted to haul his wife and 2 grandkids. But he rigged it for solo fishing. He put the seat in the middle for good weight distribution. He's fishing a double-bladed paddle. And there's his anchor rig on the back so he can hold the boat in position when he wants to fish a section. They even let old people out on the river to fish, right? Very popular boat on the river these days, a fishing kayak, a sit-on-top kayak. This is a very popular brand. One of the things to watch for if you're buying a kayak for the rivers, you maybe want to avoid one that's got what they call a sponson hull or a pontoon hull or tunnel hull, because those tend to straddle river rocks and get stuck on ledges because you've got that tunnel underneath. A smoother, more rounded bottom is probably best for the rivers, but use whatever you got. I can only imagine what would happen if this guy were to lose his balance and fall over. I think I'm counting 7 rods in here, and no telling how much other tackle is loose in here. People often ask me, I want a kayak I can stand up in. And my typical answer is the standing is more a function of your balance than it is of the boat. Sometimes I have trouble standing up on the sidewalk, so I'm not going to stand up in a kayak. But very popular boats for river fishing these days. And pontoon boats, this happens to be a 3-person pontoon. I saw bluefin leaping out of the water around his kayak. I didn't see him catch it.
Looks like a big guy. This week on the Outer Banks.
Okay, tomorrow after the next
Yeah. You catch a big fish in a kayak, just be prepared to ride for a while. Yeah. Something like that. Nantucket sleigh ride. That's right, yeah. When the whalers guys would go out in the small boats after the whales. Yeah. This is a 3-person pontoon boat. The solo pontoon boats were quite popular for a long time. You don't see many of them as much anymore, but if anybody's looking for one, I happen to have a used one for sale in the store. So this belongs to a guy named Jeff Payne who guided for a good bit on the New River. River hazards. So usually there's not much that can go wrong on a simple float trip on the South Fork or the main stem of the New. There are not really any serious rapids, but there are some things to be aware of, and one of them is that the river keeps moving, the current keeps flowing. No matter what you do, the current keeps flowing. And so invariably, here's your kayak, and you encounter a rock out in the middle of the river and you want to avoid it. Or it might be a log. You're coming down river in your boat and you say, oh, obstacle, I need to turn and avoid it. You turn and you keep drifting. If you don't paddle fast enough, then you wind up broadside against that rock. And invariably, the first reaction people have against a hazard is they lean away from the hazard. Well, when you lean away from the hazard and that current's still flowing, it sucks the side of that boat down. It might not capsize the boat, but typically the paddler falls out of it. And then the boat does capsize. Yeah. If the current's strong enough, it can wrap around a rock. Now, most of the places that we fished on the South Fork of the New, you don't have to worry about that. But you do have to worry about getting pushed broadside and then falling out of the boat because, oh, you're startled that you hit the solution to that is to learn to slip the boat sideways without turning it broadside to the hazard. And that means you have to learn either a pry stroke or a draw stroke to slip it sideways and pass it and avoid trying to turn sideways and miss it. It's very easy to misjudge the speed of the current when you start trying to turn. I had a friend follow me downriver one day, and this same thing happened to him. But it was a log out in the middle of the river, no other obstructions anywhere. And he decided he would turn, and he was watching me and not paying any attention. He hit that log, sucked the side of the boat under. All the gear went in the water. All the gear that wasn't tied down, lashed down. He had a really nice waterproof bag for his cell phone, but he hadn't closed the bag. So, things to avoid. Side slip it rather than turn. Sweepers and strainers. How many people know what a sweeper and a strainer is? So, a tree falls in the water, it's got branches and limbs out in the water, the current keeps flowing on through. It's a sweeper or a strainer. Your boat's coming down river, you get pushed up against the branches, might be heavy brush or something, same thing can happen. That current going under the boat will cause it to get sucked down. You go over and then you have the risk of being trapped in the branches or the brush, or your tackle being caught up into all that stuff. Don't ask me how I know that. Don't anchor from the side of the boat if there's any sort of current. Then I recommend anchors all the time, but then I say, but don't anchor from the side of the boat. Get into a spot where there's no current to drop the anchor. Unless you've got an anchor rig directly off the stern of the boat or the bow, be very careful where you drop that anchor. And aim for the V's and follow the foam line. You'll see a picture of a V in a minute. When you start looking at the river, you'll see spots where there'll be V's that are formed on the river as it goes between rocks and stuff. And that's usually the spot that you want to head for. And then as you go through that V, look for the foam bubbles. And the trail of the foam bubbles is probably the best course for you to follow because that's going to be the deepest water. Just like a guide might say, cast over to that foam line because that's where the fish are lying. You want to follow that foam line when you go downstream in your canoe or a kayak. And secure your keys. And have a spare. And it doesn't do any good to have your key in a nice secure pack if the pack gets lost to the river. Don't ask me how I've come up with this piece of advice either. Here's a typical spot on the main trim of the canoe. Fast water up here, some ledges and whatever. But Sarah's pulled right into this dead water, this eddy behind these big rocks. Doesn't need to anchor. If anything, that eddy is flowing back, and this is going to ease that boat right up against those rocks. But she can sit right there and fish. You can't see it in this picture, but over here's a nice run that sometimes holds fish. And, of course, a run out here. But she's in that water. So it's a good place to stop, rest, fish, whatever. You don't have to worry about anchoring or the current pulling you downriver when you don't expect it. This is an interesting rock garden. I remember the first time I saw this, and I said, oh, shucks, this is going to be interesting going through here. Well, it really is a piece of cake because it's more wide open than it appears to be. But right here's a good example of a V to aim for. You got rocks over here, shallow water. You got shallow water and rocks over here. Right here's that tongue to aim your boat through, which is going to be the deeper water. And then you just follow the foam line and look for other V's as you go downstream. Fairly typical smallmouth, and if anything is revealing secret flies, or at least popular flies, this might be it. This guy hit a chartreuse Sneaky Pete, and I've got another chartreuse topwater bug, a boogle bug over here as a backup just in case. And I probably got a couple more in my fly box. Marty, go ahead and open that up and start passing it around if you would. I know how many flies are in there. That's right. No night crawlers in there. How many people watch Mad River Outfitters videos with Brian Fleshig? A few. Okay, I'm surprised not more. Brian had a video on smallmouth bass fishing. He said one of the best topwater bugs you want to have is a big chartreuse popper, like a number 4. He said have a couple of those in your box. And he said then you might want to have a couple of chartreuse poppers also. And then in your box you might have a couple of more chartreuse poppers. So there's a theme there. Chartreuse is a real effective color. Many of you heard the saying that Lefty Cray used to say, if it's not chartreuse, it's no use. If it ain't chartreuse, it's no use. That's pretty good color in dingy water, murky water. One of the guides that I fish with, Marty Schaffner up in Elkin, he thinks white is the first color of choice. And so if we're floating together, then I'm fishing chartreuse and he's fishing white. And I don't know that there's a difference as to how many fish hit which color.
You know if he started in salt water?
He did not. I'm pretty sure he did not. He's an occasional saltwater fisherman, but not a fly fisherman.
Salt water.
Likes his chartreuse and white, yeah. So what sort of tackle do you need? And the simpler answer is just use whatever you've got and enjoy it. You got a 4-weight or 5-weight for trout, that's fine, use that. It will have limitations, not because of the size of fish that you might be hooking, but it will have limitations on the size of the flies that you can cast. So the bigger flies, number 4 poppers, you'll see a picture in a minute, they're wind resistant. If it's a windy day, something like an 8-weight is going to be a nice choice. I like an 8-weight. Sometimes I fish with a 6-weight. I never like it. I put it back down. I pick up the 8-weight again. So, but use whatever you've got. If you've got a 5-weight or a 6-weight, that's fine. You may have to go with smaller flies. And whatever fly line you've got is going to be fine. If it's a weight forward fly line or double taper fly line, doesn't matter. Let me go back here. Where'd we go here? There we are. Double taper fly line. all those work great, assuming you can cast them. Several years ago, one of the guides put me on the Royal Wolf triangle taper line, which I happen to really love. It's got a very long front taper. The line that I use has a 27-foot front taper. Most weight forward and double taper fly lines have maybe a 5 to 8 foot taper on them. This has a very long front taper, much like a single-handed spay line would have. It's a great line for roll casting. And if you're floating all day on the river or fishing all day, you know, this false casting gets a little old after a while. It's just nice to be able to do a nice roll cast. Makes it easier on the shoulder. Leaders, 9 to 12 feet, 12 feet in the summertime when the water's getting really low and clear. 8 to 10 pound tippet seems to be fine for me. And a micro swivel. How many people use micro swivels? A couple. If you haven't seen a micro swivel, well, they're hard to see because they're so doggone small. If you walked over here in Bass Pro Shops, I'd probably guess that they don't have micro swivels, but I don't know. Maybe the fly shop might. But they're much smaller than a standard swivel or a snap swivel. And they're really great because when you're false casting bigger flies, particularly topwater bugs, it's very easy for them to twist your leader. Ridiculous twist sometimes. And putting a micro swivel in there between your tippet and the main part of the leader makes all the difference in the world. Now, some of the guys are even using micro swivels on nymph rigs for trout fishing and Euro nymphing. But when you're throwing a lot of topwater casts with floating flies, that micro swivel makes a big difference. And spinning gear. Who would think about using spinning tackle?
No, can't say that.
No, can't say that. Oh my God. So I did this presentation one time, and one of the folks said, "Is that spinning gear in your canoe?" And I said, yeah, it is. You know. On a windy day, it's great. Fishing other lures, if they're not hitting flies, it's great. Really deep water, a spinning rod can make a lot of difference. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But it's important when you're starting out or whenever you're going, try and keep things simple. You don't need a whole lot of gear like the kayak picture where the guy had 7 rods. That's a little bit excessive. Start off simple. That's my advice as a retailer. As a minimum, you probably don't want more tackle than that.
You sell
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Wasn't it Stephen his younger days?
It was, yeah. This was Nightcrawler, 20 years ago. Yeah. Flies and other stuff. I like big flies, topwater bugs. The flies are going around. Those are all examples. Woolly boogers are a great fly to use. A lot of the folks come in that are going smallmouth fishing for the first time, and they say, "I need some flies. I'm a trout fisherman. I need some flies for bass." And I say, "Have you got any woolly boogers?" "Well, yeah." "Well, use those." Many people perhaps know or perhaps don't know that the woolly booger was originally tied to imitate that hellgrammite that you saw earlier in the presentation, maybe in a little bit bigger version. But it's a good smallmouth fly. Clouds or minnows. If you need minnow imitations, clawdads, crayfish patterns. Anthony Hips, who's a fairly well-known fly tyer over in the Greensboro area, he came up with a fly he calls the hell crawl. It's sort of like a big patch rubber leg or girdle bug. That's a very effective. All your standard nymphs, particularly in bigger sizes, can work well. And then all your typical bass lures if you're throwing a spinning rod. Rapalas, crankbaits, spinnerbaits, all that kind of stuff will work. But particularly Senkos and tube jigs. So there's some typical flies. Stealth bomber, clawdad, booglebug, big cupped face popper, a crittermite, and I think these are all in the box that's going around, which is a hellgrammite pattern. There's a Senko and a tube jig. And one of the nice things about this is you can rig it weedless, which is particularly important in the summertime as summer wears on, because you get a lot of moss in the river, a lot of long, stringy moss. And if you're throwing a crankbait that's got 2 treble hooks, you're going to be cleaning those hooks off after every cast if you can get the lure back in. So Senkos and tube jigs, great smallmouth bait. This is not a bad color if anybody's buying stuff. It's not a bad color to have. But just, that's green pumpkin black flake. But you didn't hear that from me.
It looks so much like the root beer.
Yeah. Better casters catch more fish. And I don't think that's more true anywhere than on a smallmouth stream or river. Trout stream casts just don't cut it. I had a customer one time, and I said, "How's your casting?" He said, "Oh, it's great." He said, "I've been trout fishing for 15, 20 years." And I said, "Good, excellent." Unfortunately, he couldn't do a roll cast. He couldn't do a pick-up and lay-down cast. He didn't know what false casting was. It was a long day on the river. We had to stop like in the first 30 minutes and attempt to have a casting lesson, which is not the best time to do that. Trout stream casts, don't cut it on the river when you're fishing for smallmouth. You got to make a longer cast, sometimes a lot longer, and then a lot of times they have to be accurate to get them up under those overhanging limbs and bushes. Sometimes you want to throw wide loops. We all talk about throwing nice tight loops. Mike Helms and I talk about this often. Nice tight loops are great when you need a bullseye under the overhanging branches, but a lot of times a big wide sloppy loop so that fly splats down on the water is what you might want. A good roll cast, 20 or 30 foot roll cast, in addition to that 9 or 12 foot leader, oftentimes save the day. Flies are bigger, they're typically more wind resistant, sometimes heavier, but not often. But the more you work to improve your casts, the better you're going to do smallmouth fishing and the more success you're going to have. And I think there's a lot of casting opportunities in the club because Mike's doing this cast on the grass on weekends. Nick and Sarah went to a clinic on teaching people to cast a fly rod. I think some of the women not here tonight have been to the Joan Wolfe School up in New York State. So there's a lot of casting savvy around if people are looking for coaching. The picnic, yeah, because
Question on fleet. Do you have a tapered 12
I always use a tapered 12-foot leader simply because I think you need that taper for a good turnover. Now, some folks will say, "Oh, I use a 6-foot piece of 10-pound monofilament and do fine," and they probably do. But I sell leaders, so I always use leaders, particularly tapered leaders. One of the things that, now not everybody carries a 12-foot leader around with them. There was a long period there where I didn't stock 12-foot leaders, and I probably still don't, except for maybe some saltwater situations. I would take a 3-foot section of 30-pound mono, put loops in either end of it. So if I had a 9-foot leader or a 7.5-foot leader and I wanted to make it longer, instead of adding more tippet to it, because that longer tippet might not turn over a big wind-resistant fly, I would add more butt section, heavy butt section, so that I still get that energy transfer going down towards the tippet. So rather than extending the length of the tippet, I would extend the butt section. But you just have to make sure you've got like 25 or 30-pound mono that you can make a butt section extension with. Keys to success. Research and investigate places to go. Now, some of the popular places on the South Fork that are easy to access, like the New River State Park access areas, they're also the sites of a major hatch on the weekends. That would be an inner tube hatch. And you wouldn't believe, well, maybe if you've been out there, it's amazing the number of people that are out there floating in inner tubes on the weekends. Particularly if you're near one of the places that rents tubes. I sent a customer up to the relatively newly opened Elk Shoals access area on the South Fork of the New and said, oh, it's great. One of the guides up there used to fish that section all the time. Well, now that it is a state park access area, people go in there with the inner tubes. They walk up the gravel road, put their inner tubes in, and float back down through the prime fishing area. And so he said, well, it would have been a good day if it hadn't been for all the inner tubers out there. So one of the things to watch for. Go more than once, practice, repetition is the key. I have a friend that says, I've never caught a smallmouth. Well, how often do you go? Well, I've been twice. And so you got to keep going, you got to keep at it. If you get a chance, fish with a guide. You can learn a lot fishing with a guide, but you also learn spots where fish are likely to lie on particular sections of the river. Repetition and practice is the key. And then you'll be a happy camper like this guy. And Dave McBurney, Dave's been a long-time club member. He had a nice day on the New River with a big streamer that he had tied. So, good way to enjoy the summertime when the trout fishing is slow in other parts of the world. Smallmouth bass fishing on the river can make all the difference. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Richard.
Yep, thank you.
We'll take about a 5-minute break and see if anybody wants to